The lawyer's voice droning on about probate and codicils felt distant, like a radio station I couldn't quite tune in. I shifted in the stiff velvet chair, the scent of stale paper and something vaguely floral lavender, perhaps, or the ghost of it tickling my nostrils. My fingers traced the worn leather of my sketchbook cover, a familiar anchor in this sea of legal jargon. Blackwood Manor. The name itself was a cold breath on the back of my neck. My grandmother. Estranged. It felt like a poorly written sentence, devoid of real meaning, yet here I was, the sole inheritor of a crumbling legacy. Outside, the sky was the color of bruised plums, heavy and threatening rain. I'd driven for hours, the familiar ache in my shoulders a constant companion. My studio back in the city felt a million miles away, a sanctuary of controlled chaos where I could wrestle my demons onto canvas. Here, in this sterile, anonymous office, the demons felt closer, their whispers amplified by the hushed reverence of the room. I kept my gaze fixed on a framed diploma on the wall, its gold leaf flaking like a dying leaf. The lawyer cleared his throat. "And so, Mr. Dean, as the only living relative, you are now the sole owner of Blackwood Manor and all its contents." He slid a thick brass key across the polished mahogany desk. It felt heavy, substantial, a physical manifestation of a past I'd spent years trying to outrun. The inscription on the fob was ornate, almost serpentine. "Are there any outstanding matters?" I managed, my voice rougher than I intended. The lawyer offered a thin smile. "Only the usual. Property taxes, upkeep. The caretaker, Mrs. Gable, has been maintaining the grounds, but she's elderly. The house hasn't been lived in for some time." He paused, his eyes small, bird-like, flicking towards a filing cabinet. "There are, of course, certain personal effects, belongings of your grandmother's. The house is being sold as is." As is. A convenient phrase for a house that had likely seen more secrets than sunlight. I barely remembered her. A stern woman, all sharp angles and disapproving glances. She'd never approved of my mother, and by extension me. The drive to Blackwood Manor was a descent. The paved road gave way to gravel, then to a rutted track swallowed by overgrown ferns. The trees, ancient and gnarled, clawed at the sky, their branches laced with a premature twilight. The air grew thick, heavy with the damp scent of decay and something else, something metallic like old blood. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I could feel it now, a prickling sensation on my scalp, a familiar unease that had plagued me since childhood. And then, through a curtain of dripping branches, I saw it. It wasn't just decaying, it was actively disintegrating. Windows, like vacant eyes, stared out from beneath heavy, moss-covered eaves. A single turret, leaning precariously, seemed to defy gravity. It was a monument to neglect, a Gothic cliché come to life. My breath hitched. This was it, the place. The key felt like a burning ember in my pocket. I walked towards the massive oak door, its surface scarred and weathered. The lark groaned a protest as I turned the key. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the gloom. The air inside was stagnant, heavy with the scent of mildew, old dust, and something else, something sweet and cloying like overripe fruit. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was more than just a house. It was a tomb. I stepped across the threshold, the door groaning shut behind me with a finality that sent a tremor through the floorboards. My footsteps echoed in the vast emptiness of the foyer. Portraits lined the walls, their subjects' eyes seeming to follow me, their painted lips curled into faint, knowing smiles. A faint, rhythmic thumping drew my attention. It was low, guttural, coming from somewhere deep within the house. A mechanical sound, steady and relentless. It was coming from below. A sign, almost obscured by cobwebs, hung precariously above it. Boiler room, no radio contact. The thumping grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't just a sound. I could feel it vibrating through the soles of my shoes, a pulse in the heart of the decaying house. A shiver, unrelated to the temperature, traced its way down my spine. I hadn't been here in 20 years, not since the incident. But the memory, a fractured image of porcelain skin and vacant glass eyes, was suddenly sharp, vivid, and terrifying. Why had my grandmother left me this place? And what was that sound? The gravel crunched under the tires of my car, a sound swallowed by the oppressive silence that clung to Blackwood Manor like a shroud. The gates, wrought iron twisted into skeletal fingers, sagged open, an invitation to decay. The house itself loomed, a hulking silhouette against a bruised twilight sky. Its gables, sharp and accusing, pierced the clouds, and the windows, dark and vacant, seemed to watch my arrival with a collective, unblinking stare. This was it. The place I'd tried to scrub from my memory, the source of so many nightmares. My grandmother's house. The air tasted of damp earth and something else, something faintly metallic, like old pennies. My hands trembled as I reached for the car door. The hinges groaned a protest as I pulled it open, the sound unnaturally loud. Stepping out, I felt a prickle on my skin, a sensation of being observed not by the house, but by something within it. The front door was unlocked. Of course it was. My grandmother had been a creature of habit, but her habits had always been steeped in a peculiar brand of neglect. Sunlight, what little managed to penetrate the grimy panes, cast weak, jaundiced stripes across the worn oriental rugs. The scent of decay was stronger here, mingled with the faint, cloying sweetness of dried flowers and the acrid tang of old polish. My footsteps echoed on the polished wood floors as I moved deeper into the house. Each room was a tableau of a life long past, frozen in time. A grandfather clock stood silent in the hall, its pendulum stilled, its face a cracked mosaic of Roman numerals. In the drawing room, antimacassars draped over faded velvet chairs, like spectral occupants waiting for their return. A half-finished needlepoint lay on a small table, the threads brittle and faded. It felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. I found myself drawn to the back of the house, towards a narrow, unadorned door tucked away beneath the grand staircase. The boiler room, no radio contact. A place my grandmother had always kept locked, a place she'd warned me away from with a ferocity that had always unnerved me. It turned in the lock with a reluctant click, and the door creaked open, revealing a descent into an even deeper gloom. The air that billowed out was heavy with the smell of oil, rust, and something else, something acrid and unpleasant like burnt sugar. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the light switch. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run. I flicked the switch. A single, bare bulb flickered to life, casting harsh, unflattering light on a scene of industrial desolation. The boiler itself was a behemoth of rusted metal, its pipes snaking across the floor and up the walls like metallic vines. Cobwebs, thick as cotton batting, draped from every surface, shimmering in the dim light. The floor was a mosaic of cracked concrete, slick with a fine, greasy film. It was here, amidst the detritus of forgotten function, that I felt it. A subtle shift in the atmosphere, a pressure that wasn't just the weight of the house. It was a presence, a prickling awareness at the back of my neck. I scanned the room, my gaze falling on a small wooden shelf bolted to the wall, and then I saw it. A doll. It sat propped against a grimy pipe, its porcelain face chipped and faded, its once bright yarn hair matted and dull. Its button eyes, one slightly askew, seemed to stare directly at me. Leela, my breath hitched. It couldn't be. My grandmother had promised. She'd promised me she'd gotten rid of it. Yet there he was, exactly as I remembered her, except for the dust, the decay, the palpable aura of something ancient and wrong that clung to her like a second skin. My hands clenched into fists. The air grew heavy, thick with an invisible weight. A low hum, barely audible, seemed to emanate from the boiler or perhaps from the doll itself. It vibrated in my teeth, a discordant thrum that set my nerves on edge. I took a step back, my boots scuffing against the concrete. The doll's head tilted, a slow, deliberate movement that defied the stillness of the room. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Was I imagining it? Why was she here? And more importantly, why did it feel like he was waiting for me? The air inside Blackwood Manor was thick with the scent of dust and something else, something cloying and sweet, like overripe fruit left to rot. My footsteps echoed unnervingly on the bare floorboards as I moved from room to room, each one a tableau of abandonment. Faded tapestries hung like ghosts from the walls, their once vibrant threads now muted and frayed. Furniture, draped in white sheets, loomed like shrouded figures in the dim light filtering through grimy windows. My grandmother, a woman I barely knew, had hoarded this place, and her memories seemed to seep from every cracked plaster surface. I'd spent the first day just existing within these walls, trying to breathe the stale air without gagging, trying to ignore the persistent feeling of being watched. The silence here wasn't empty. It was a presence, heavy and expectant. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind through a broken pane felt like a breath held too long. My grandmother's will had been clear. I was to sort through her belongings. A daunting task, considering the sheer volume of accumulated detritus. I started with the study, a room dominated by a massive, claw-footed desk piled high with yellowed correspondence and brittle photographs. The light here was even weaker, the windows obscured by a dense growth of ivy. I ran a gloved hand over the desk's surface, the wood cool and strangely smooth beneath the dust. It felt like touching a tomb. Hours bled into each other. I opened drawers filled with dried inkwells and quill pens, their tips brittle and useless. I found stacks of ledger books, their pages crammed with an indecipherable script that was too small, too cramped, for my tired eyes. There were personal effects, to a silver locket, empty, a single tarnished earring, a faded silk ribbon. Each item felt like a fragment of a life I'd never understood, a puzzle with too many missing pieces. The afternoon wore on. I found myself drawn to a large, ornate wooden chest tucked away in a corner, half hidden by a moth-eaten rug. It was heavy, secured with a rusted padlock. I rummaged through a drawer until I found a small, tarnished key. My fingers fumbled with the lock, the tumblers grinding with a protesting shriek. The lid creaked open, releasing a puff of air that smelled like mothballs and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet. Inside, nestled amongst layers of brittle lace and yellowed linens, was a collection of her things. Porcelain figurines, their painted smiles unnervingly fixed, a stack of intricately carved wooden boxes. My breath hitched. My hands, which had been steady moments before, began to tremble. It was Leela, smaller than I remembered, but undeniably her. The porcelain skin, unnaturally smooth and cool to the touch, the vacant glass eyes that seemed to stare not at me, but through me. The tiny, stitched smile that was less a smile and more a rictus. The same faded blue dress, the lace trim frayed and discolored. He was here. After all these years, he was here. A wave of nausea washed over me. My vision swam, the edges of the room blurring. Fragments of memory, sharp and unwelcome, pierced through the haze of the present. A child's scream, the scent of damp earth. My own small hands, grubby and trembling, reaching out, then recoiling. I saw it again, the way her head had tilted just a fraction when I dropped her. The way her painted eyes had seemed to follow my movement. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. It was just a doll, a stupid old doll. The day I'd sworn I'd never see her again. I backed away from the chest, my eyes fixed on it, as if expecting it to spring open on its own. The air in the study felt thinner now, harder to draw into my lungs. The sweet, cloying smell was stronger, more insistent. It was the smell of fear. My fear. Had my grandmother kept her, deliberately? Why? I needed to get out of this room. I needed to get out of the house. The weight of the house pressed down on me, a palpable force. There was that movement in the corner of my eye, a flicker of blue fabric. I needed to be sure. I needed to see her again to prove to myself that it was just a doll, just a memory. But the thought of opening that chest again sent a fresh wave of panic through me. Could she still do it? Could she still twist things, make me see what wasn't there? Or worse, what was there? My grandmother's possessions were a minefield, and I had just stumbled upon the most dangerous explosive. What else was hidden in this decaying mausoleum? What else had she kept, waiting for me? The silence of Blackwood Manor wasn't empty. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, woven with the whispers of decay. I'd explored the main floors, the grand ballroom with its skeletal chandelier, the library where leather-bound volumes crumbled to dust at a touch. Each room felt like a breath held too long, waiting to exhale something foul. My grandmother, a woman I barely remembered, had hoarded secrets here like she hoarded these relics of a forgotten era. My grandmother's lawyer, a man whose face seemed perpetually etched with mild disapproval, had mentioned the need to check the utility rooms. He'd given me a thick, iron key, its teeth worn smooth by time, and a curt nod. Most important, needs a look. He'd offered no further explanation. The phrase itself had a metallic tang, a warning I hadn't heeded until now. The descent was steep, a narrow spiral staircase carved from rough-hewn stone. The sweet, rotting scent intensified, a sickly perfume that clawed at the back of my throat. My flashlight beam, a meager defiance against the encroaching gloom, danced across walls slick with condensation. Each drip was a tiny hammer blow against the quiet. The door to the boiler room, no radio contact, was a hulking slab of rust-pitted steel. The key grated in the lock, a sound that vibrated through the bones in my hand. The air here was a tangible thing, thick with the acrid bite of old oil and a pervasive metallic tang that reminded me of old pennies. Dominating the center of the room was the boiler itself, a monstrous cast-iron beast slumbering in the perpetual twilight. Its pipes snaked across the ceiling and walls like skeletal vines, coated in a thick layer of grime. Cobwebs, heavy with dust, draped from every surface, swaying gently in a draft I couldn't feel. It was a forgotten heart, beating a slow, irregular rhythm of disuse. As my flashlight beam swept across the far wall, it caught something. A small wooden crate, half hidden behind a stack of decaying burlap sacks. Curiosity, a dangerous companion in this place, tugged at me. I moved closer, the crunch of grit under my boots unnervingly loud. The crate was old, its wood warped and stained, but it was sealed. No markings, no labels, just the promise of whatever my grandmother had deemed important enough to hide in the bowels of her decaying home. I ran my gloved fingers over the rough wood. It felt, watched. I shook my head. This house was playing tricks on me. I was an artist, prone to flights of fancy, seeing patterns where none existed. Then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic scraping. It wasn't the drip of water. This was a deliberate sound, like fingernails dragging across rough wood. It came from the direction of the boiler. I froze, my breath catching in my chest. My flashlight beam snapped towards the hulking machine. Nothing, the scraping stopped. For a moment, only the frantic thrumming of my own pulse filled the space. It was high-pitched, childish. Dean! My blood turned to ice. That voice. I hadn't heard it in years, not since I'd buried it deep, deep down. It was Leela's voice, or the memory of it. It couldn't be real. This was the boiler room, no radio contact. No one else was here. The crate, the burlap sacks, the stone walls, all inert. I could almost feel the phantom weight of her gaze, the unsettling stillness that always preceded her. Manifestations. My hands trembled. I forced myself to move, to check behind the boiler, to prove to myself that I was alone. The air grew heavier, the sweet, rotten scent almost overpowering. I strained my ears, listening for any sound, any confirmation that this was just my mind unraveling. Behind the boiler, tucked into a recess in the stone wall, was a small porcelain doll. It was Leela. Her painted eyes, wide and vacant, seemed to stare directly at me. He was propped up, as if waiting. My breath hitched. I hadn't put her there. I was certain of it. The last time I'd seen her, she'd been packed away, locked in a trunk in the attic. How had she gotten here? A low hum started, emanating from the boiler. It wasn't the sound of a machine powering up. It was deeper, more resonant, a guttural thrum that vibrated through the floor and up my legs. The air around the doll seemed to shimmer, distorting the weak light of my flashlight. There was this a trick of the light. The beam of my flashlight landed on a tangle of pipes, rust blooming like a disease. Nothing. Just the groaning belly of the house, the hum of unseen machinery. Leela's voice, a thin, reedy whisper, echoed in my mind, a phantom limb I couldn't sever. Dean, you remember? I backed away, my boots scuffing on the gritty concrete floor. The air in the boiler room, no radio contact, was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet, like old pennies and decay. It clung to the back of my throat. I swallowed, but the taste lingered. This place, this entire house, felt like it was breathing, its lungs filling with my fear. My studio, that's where I needed to be. The canvases were waiting. I hadn't touched them since that night, since the whispering began in earnest, since the shadows in the corners of my vision started to coalesce into familiar, terrible shapes. My hands trembled as I fumbled for the heavy iron door handle. Back in my temporary studio, the vast, empty space felt less like a sanctuary and more like an arena. The raw, stretched canvases stared at me, accusingly blank. It was a symphony of unease. My fingers brushed against a tube of crimson paint. It felt unnaturally warm. I squeezed it, and the thick pigment oozed out, a viscous, startling red. It looked too much like blood. I stared at it, mesmerized, the memory of a scraped knee, a childish cry flashing behind my eyes. Leela's dull face, serene and porcelain, watching. Always watching. I picked up a brush, the bristles stiff and rough against my skin. My hand moved before I consciously willed it to. The first stroke was tentative, a smear of grey that bled into the stark white. Then a jagged line of black, like a scar. The metallic tang from the boiler room seemed to seep into the very air around me, a phantom scent that made my stomach clench. Hours blurred. The moonlight shifted, painting the room in shades of silver and deep indigo. I worked with a frantic, almost desperate energy. The house creaked and groaned around me, each sound amplified in the stillness. The floorboards upstairs sighed under an unseen weight, a distant thud like something heavy being dropped. My breath hitched with every noise, my muscles tensed, ready to flee, but where? The images on the canvas were emerging from a place I'd tried to seal off. Twisted figures, their limbs elongated and contorted, their faces blank or screaming. They were my nightmares made manifest, given form and substance by the relentless pressure of this house, of her. I saw a child's hand, small and delicate, reaching for a doll with vacant glass eyes. I saw a room bathed in sickly yellow light, the wallpaper peeling like sunburnt skin. My own hands were stained with paint, the crimson and black seeping into my cuticles. The brush felt like an extension of my own trembling nerves. I could feel it, a foreign energy coursing through me, guiding my strokes. It wasn't entirely my own creation. Leela was in the paint. Leela was in the canvas. I was painting her, wasn't I? Not just the doll, but the feeling she evoked. I was capturing the way the light used to fall in my childhood bedroom, the way it seemed to bend and warp around her. My focus snapped back to the canvas. It pulsed with a malevolent energy, a silent scream trapped within the pigment. I stepped back, my chest heaving. The room was a mess of scattered brushes, smeared rags, and overturned paint pots. The air was thick with the acrid smell of turpentine and something else, something cloying and sweet like rotting flowers. On the largest canvas, a scene of disquieting horror was taking shape, and on that landing, barely discernible in the gloom, was a figure, a doll. But this was no mere toy. Its porcelain smile was too wide, its painted eyes too knowing. I could feel it, a physical ache, a phantom weight settling on my chest. Was it just the moonlight playing tricks, or was something actually moving on the canvas? The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen force. I could feel the familiar prickle of sweat on my brow, the tightening in my gut. The house groaned again, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the floor and up into my teeth. And then I heard it. Faint but distinct. A soft, childlike giggle, seemingly coming from the direction of the hall. It was a sound that had haunted my sleep for years. It was Leela's giggle. But I was alone in this vast, empty house. There wasn't I. The metallic tang in the air, once faint, now pressed against my nostrils, heavy and cloying. My breath hitched, a dry rasp in the oppressive quiet of the boiler room, no radio contact. I fumbled for my flashlight, its beam a weak halo against the encroaching shadows. It danced over rusted pipes, thick with grime and the weeping trails of condensation, then settled on the far wall. It was as if the very stones of the foundation were exhaling frost. My fingers tightened around the flashlight, gripped tight. I had to know. I had to see what lay beyond that peeling, water-stained plaster. My boots crunched on loose gravel as I moved closer. The sweet, carpery scent intensified, now laced with a faint, sickly perfume, like wilted roses left too long in a closed room. It was a smell I tried to bury, a scent that had clung to my childhood bedroom, a scent that Leela had somehow always carried. My gaze fell upon a section of the wall where the plaster had crumbled away entirely, revealing rough-hewn brick beneath. But it wasn't just brick. There were markings, scratched into the mortar, deep gouges that looked less like intentional carvings and more like desperate claw marks. My breath stuttered. I recognized them. Not consciously, not from any waking memory, but from the nightmares. Those frantic, nonsensical scratches that would fill the edges of my sleep, always just beyond my grasp, just out of focus. They were the same. I traced one of the deeper grooves with a trembling fingertip. The brick felt unnaturally smooth, worn down by countless unseen abrasions. As I followed the spiral, my fingers brushed against something that wasn't brick or mortar. It was yielding, almost leathery. I held my breath and pushed. The section of brick gave way, not with a scrape or a groan, but with a soft, sickening sigh, like air being expelled from a dying lung. The smell that wafted out was overpoweringly sweet, sickly, and laced with that familiar metallic tang. It was the smell of Leela. It illuminated a small, rough-hewn wooden box, its surface weathered and warped. It was bound with tarnished brass clasps, each one intricately carved with tiny, unsettling faces. With trembling hands, I reached for the clasps. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet that crumbled at my touch, lay a single, yellowed envelope. It was brittle with age, the paper thin and fragile. My grandmother's familiar, spidery handwriting adorned its front, addressed to no one, but with a single word scrawled across the top, Leela. My hands shook so violently I could barely pick it up. The paper crackled like dried leaves as I unfolded it. The words inside were a confession, a desperate outpouring of guilt and fear, written in a shaky hand that mirrored my own present state. It spoke of a pact, a desperate bargain struck in the depths of her grief after my grandfather's death, a need for comfort for a companion. She wrote of finding an old doll in a dusty antique shop, a doll with eyes that seemed to watch her, to understand her loneliness. She called it Leela, but Leela wasn't just a doll. My grandmother wrote of how the doll changed, how it offered solace but at a terrible cost. It fed on something, she wrote, on attention, on fear, on innocence. My breath hitched. The specific event, the one I'd pushed so far down I'd convinced myself it was a dream. The doll sitting on my dresser, its painted smile widening. My grandmother's words blurred before my eyes. He had known what Leela was, what she did. He had tried to contain her, to lock her away. He had thought it was enough. But the letter continued, detailing how Leela's influence had seeped beyond the doll itself, how it had woven itself into the very fabric of the house, how it had begun to twist my grandmother's mind, making her see things, hear things, making her believe Leela was protecting her, guiding her. My grandmother wrote of her growing unease, her sudden horror at what he had unleashed. She spoke of Leela's hunger that Leela promised to sate with the sweetest of offerings. And then, a single, desperate plea, scratched out with a ferocity that bled through the ink. It wants the child. It always wants the child. The envelope slipped from my nerveless fingers, fluttering to the concrete floor. The metallic scent was overwhelming now, thick and suffocating. My vision swam. The walls of the boiler room, no radio contact, seemed to press in, the rough brick groaning under an unseen weight. Leela wanted the child. It always wants the child. There was that what had happened all those years ago. Had my grandmother in her madness offered me up? Had Leela taken something from me that night, something I could never get back? And if he had, what was left for her to take now? The envelope lay splayed on the cold concrete, its edges curling inward. The metallic tang in the air, so sharp before, now felt like a physical presence. A thick, cloying mist clinging to my lungs. Gasped, but the air offered no relief, only the same coppery bite. The words echoed in the cavernous space of the boiler room, no radio contact, each syllable a hammer blow against my resolve. My hands trembled, the tremor spreading through my arms, my chest. I pressed myself against the damp, rough brick, trying to ground myself, to feel the solid reality of the wall. But even that felt suspect. The brick seemed to shift, to breathe, the mortar between them weeping a dark, viscous fluid. There was that just the condensation, the perpetual damp of this forgotten place, or something else. My mind, already frayed, latched onto the ladder. I had to get out. That was the only thought that cut through the rising panic. Out of this room, out of this house, away from whatever Leela was becoming. I scrambled to my feet, my boots scraping against the concrete, the sound unnervingly loud in the suffocating quiet. The metal door, my only exit, loomed ahead. It wouldn't budge. I shoved, then threw my weight against it. Nothing. It was as if it had fused with the frame, a single, unyielding piece of iron. My breath hitched. I rattled it again, harder this time, the metal groaning in protest, a sound that mimicked my own despair. It was no use. "You can't leave, Dean, not yet." I spun around, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The room was empty, save for the hulking, silent shapes of the old boilers, their rust-eaten shells like slumbering beasts. I'd heard it. I knew I had. My gaze darted around, searching for the source, for any sign of movement. It was the lullaby my mother used to sing, the one I hadn't heard in decades. I took a hesitant step forward, then another, my eyes fixed on the furthest boiler, its massive cylindrical body disappearing into the gloom. And then I saw it. A small, porcelain hand, impassibly white against the grimy metal, emerged from behind the boiler. It was tiny, delicate, with painted fingernails chipped and faded. My breath caught in my throat. It was Leela's hand. The hand beckoned, a slow, deliberate movement, the humming intensified, weaving a hypnotic spell. "Come and play." I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs refused to obey. My gaze was locked on that small, beckoning hand. It was impassable. Leela was just a doll. A cursed, malevolent doll, yes, but still an object. Yet here it was, moving, beckoning. The walls of the boiler room, no radio contact, seemed to shrink, to close in. The metallic scent intensified, so strong I could taste it on my tongue. It tasted like old pennies, like dried blood. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to banish the image, the sound, the smell. I counted. 1, 2, 3. I focused on the texture of the brick beneath my fingertips, the rough, unyielding surface. When I opened my eyes, the hand was gone. The humming had ceased, but the door, it was open. Hope, a fragile, dangerous thing, flickered within me. I didn't question it. I didn't hesitate. I bolted towards the opening, my boots pounding against the concrete, the sound echoing like a desperate prayer. I burst out of the boiler room and into the hallway, gasping for air, for sanity. The air here was cleaner, less suffocating, but still thick with the scent of dust and decay. The house was silent, unnervingly so, but there was nothing. I turned and ran, my footsteps a frantic rhythm on the creaking floorboards. I had to get to the main hall, to the front door, to the outside. I needed sunlight, fresh air, the mundane noise of the world to anchor me. As I reached the grand staircase, a faint, tinkling sound drifted from the upper landing. It was the music box. The one I'd found in the attic, the one that played Leela's lullaby. But it was coming from the wrong direction. It was coming from my old room, my childhood bedroom. Had I closed the door to my room when I'd last been up there? I couldn't remember. My mind was a fog of fear and confusion. The music box had been locked away. How could it be playing now? I paused, my hand hovering over the banister. The music, though faint, seemed to beckon me, to draw me back upstairs. This was a trap, I knew it. A carefully laid snare. But the lure of that familiar, terrifying melody, the promise of confronting whatever Leela had become in the place where it all began. It was a pull I couldn't resist. The music box played on, its delicate notes weaving a siren song. There was my childhood room, the key to understanding, or the final cage. The chill was a physical thing, a clammy hand pressing against my skin, stealing my breath. My eyes darted to the attic door, then back to the doll. It was a trick of the light, a hallucination. It had to be. I squeezed my eyes shut, counting to 10, the way my mother used to tell me when I was a child, and the shadows in my room seemed to writhe. 1, 2, 3. The air in the hallway grew heavy, thick with the smell of dust and something else, something sickly sweet like decaying lilies. 4, 5, I could feel it, a prickling sensation at the base of my skull, an unseen presence watching, waiting. 6, 7. When I opened my eyes, the doll was closer. Just a few inches, but it was enough. Its porcelain smile seemed wider, a cruel, knowing curve. The button eyes, usually fixed and vacant, felt like they were boring into me, stripping away years of denial, of carefully constructed defenses. My hands clenched, nails digging into my palms. This was it. No more running, no more pretending. I turned and fled, not back into the house, but towards the service stairs, the ones that led down to the bowels of the mansion. The boiler room, place I'd been avoiding, the place that felt like the heart of this rot. The sickly sweet smell intensified, cloying, nauseating. The heavy steel door of the boiler room, no radio contact, loomed before me. I'd found it earlier, a forgotten space filled with the hulking, rust-streaked machinery of a bygone era. I pushed it open. The hinges shrieked in protest, a sound that scraped against my nerves. Inside, the air was a suffocating blanket of heat and damp. The massive boiler, a monstrous metal belly, hissed and gurgled, its pipes like skeletal limbs reaching into the gloom. A single bare bulb cast a weak, flickering light, painting the grime-caked walls in shades of sickly yellow. The smell of oil and old metal was overpowering, but beneath it, that cloying sweetness persisted, stronger now, almost unbearable. I stumbled further in, my boots crunching on loose gravel and something else. Something gritty that felt like shattered ceramic. I didn't dare look down. My eyes scanned the room, searching for her. A flicker of movement caught my attention. It was Leela. She stood no taller than my knee, her calico dress faded and torn, her yarn hair matted and tangled. But it was her face that held me captive. The painted cheeks were chipped, revealing the pale porcelain beneath, and her smile, that familiar, unsettling smile, seemed to stretch impassably wide. Her button eyes gleamed in the dim light, reflecting the weak glow of the bulb like predatory animal eyes. She didn't move, not at first. I could feel her thoughts, a cold, invasive whisper in the back of my mind, like icy fingers tracing the contours of my deepest fears. "You can't escape, Dean. You never could." My breath hitched. I could feel the sweat beading on my forehead, trickling down my temples. My hands trembled. This was not a doll. This was something else. Something ancient and hungry. Then she moved. Slowly, deliberately, she raised one small porcelain hand. It was the same hand that had beckoned me from the attic. It pointed, not at me, but at the boiler. The great metal beast seemed to sigh, a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated through the floor. The hissing intensified, growing louder, more insistent. "You let me back in." I took a step back, my heel hitting a loose pipe. Leela's head tilted, her button eyes tracking my movement. The sickly, sweet smell was overpowering now, a suffocating perfume. It filled my lungs, burning. I remembered the journal, the faded ink detailing rituals, the desperate pleas of my grandmother. It spoke of binding, of containment. I hadn't understood it then. I dismissed it as the ramblings of a lonely old woman. But now, standing in this suffocating heat, facing this impassable horror, I knew. He was not just a doll. He was a vessel, and the house was her prison. Or was it her sanctuary? The boiler let out another groan, a low, guttural sound that seemed to come from its very core. A thin plume of grey smoke curled from its exhaust pipe. Leela took a step forward, her tiny feet making no sound on the gravel. Her smile widened, and for the first time I saw it clearly. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated hunger. What was she feeding on? My fear, my memories, my very life force. The heat intensified, pressing in on me, making it hard to breathe. Leela took another step, and then another, closing the distance between us with an unnerving grace. I had to do something, but what? How do I fight a memory given form? The hiss died. Silence. Not the quiet kind, but a thick, suffocating blanket that pressed in on my eardrums. The boiler room, no radio contact, felt like the bottom of the world. The air, already heavy with the metallic tang of rust, and something else, something acrid and sweet like rotting flowers, grew colder. I could see my breath misting in front of me, a ghostly plume in the dim light cast by the single, bare bulb hanging from a fraying cord. My muscles were coiled tight, every nerve ending screaming a silent alarm. My gaze snapped back to the doll. Leela. He was perched on the edge of the overturned metal stool, her porcelain face unnervingly smooth, her painted smile a grotesque rictus. The light caught her glass eyes, making them gleam with a malevolent intelligence that had no business residing in painted china. She hadn't moved since the boiler's last gasp, but the feeling of her gaze, sharp and probing, was a physical pressure against my skin. It was the same sensation I remembered from when I was a child, that prickling awareness that I was being watched, judged, hated. My hands, slick with sweat, fumbled for the heavy wrench I'd dropped earlier. I tightened my grip tight. This was it. This was the moment I'd been running from for 20 years. A faint scratching sound. My head whipped around. Nothing, but the sound. It had been so distinct, like tiny claws on metal. I swallowed, the click loud in the unnatural quiet. Leela remained on the stool, her head tilted slightly, as if listening, or perhaps as if she knew. I took a step forward, the clang of my boot on the concrete floor echoing unnervingly. The wrench felt heavy, clumsy. My arm trembled. I wanted to smash her, to shatter that smug, painted face into 1,000 pieces. But a deeper fear, a primal instinct, held me back. What if breaking her didn't end it? What if it unleashed something worse? The stories my grandmother had told me, the ones I'd dismissed as the ramblings of an old woman, flickered through my mind. Tales of things that couldn't be destroyed, only appeased. The scratching came again, louder this time and closer. My eyes strained, trying to pierce the gloom. There was something there, or was it just the doll, her influence weaving illusions in the air, playing tricks on my frayed nerves? I edged around the hulking, silent boiler, keeping my eyes fixed on Leela. She hadn't moved, but the air around her seemed to shimmer, to distort. The acrid, sweet smell intensified, making my stomach churn. It was the scent of decay, something that had been buried for too long and was now clawing its way back to the surface. My foot nudged something on the floor. I glanced down. A small, tarnished silver locket. My breath hitched. Had Leela dropped it, or had it been placed there? As I bent to pick it up, a sudden, violent gust of wind tore through the boiler room. It was impassable. The space was sealed. The only ingress the heavy metal door I'd locked behind me. The scratching intensified, a frenzied scrabbling, and it was no longer coming from the corner. It was coming from behind the boiler. My heart hammered a desperate rhythm against my ribs. I spun around, wrench held high, ready to strike. A low, guttural growl like that of a starved animal scraped at the edges of my hearing. It was a sound that belonged to no living creature I knew. Leela's laughter, thin and reedy, echoed through the sudden stillness. It wasn't the doll's voice. It was the voice of a child, a terrified child, twisted into something monstrous. My own childhood screamed in my ears. I squeezed my eyes shut, the wrench falling from my numb fingers to clatter on the concrete. The smell of rot and decay was overwhelming now, thick and suffocating. When I opened my eyes, the boiler room was silent again. The wind had died. The bulb shone steadily. Leela sat on the stool, her painted smile as serene as ever. The scratching was gone. The growl was gone. But the smell lingered, a phantom stench that clung to the back of my throat. It looked like old, dried blood. I backed away slowly, my gaze never leaving the doll. I didn't understand. The boiler had stopped. The noises had stopped. I had faced her, I had stood my ground. But had I won? Or had I merely survived another round? The locket lay on the floor, forgotten. It was filled with the echo of a child's corrupted laughter and the unsettling certainty that some things, once awakened, never truly sleep. What had I truly put to rest in this forgotten space?